Hi everyone, and hey, good timing. Good to see you, Chief. Thank you for everyone who shows up. Thank you for everyone who's already here. Thank you everyone who's here early. Sorry about that, a little bit of technical difficulties yesterday. Not being in the house kind of really sucks because I don't have, consistent Wi-Fi. So I'm bouncing off using some public Wi-Fi and my phone as a hotspot. So, yippee with that. I hope it doesn't crash. Depends on if my phone decides it wants to hold up today. So hopefully it doesn't crash. Because today we're talking about Robert A. Berdella, the butcher of Kansas City. He is originally from Ohio, so that's one of the reasons that we're talking about him today. Some of the pictures that are coming up are of him when he was arrested, him before he was arrested, his house, which is notorious. One of the really, really scary things about him is that they never found any of the bodies. They just found all of the evidence in his home of him talking about all of these murders and how exactly they happened. Alright, so Robert A. Berdella, aka the Butcher of Kansas City, serial killer, characteristics: rape, torture, the bodies were never found, number of victims 6. He murdered from 1984 to 1987, so only 3 years. Date of arrest, April 2nd, 1988. Date of birth, January 31st, 1949. The victims were Robert Sheldon, 18, Jerry Howell, 20, which is terrifying. Yeah, still to this day, never found. And we'll get into that. How he disposed of the bodies is, clever to say the least. Mark Wallace, 20, James Ferris, 20, Todd Stoops, 21, and Larry Pearson, 20. He murdered everyone via poisoning, aka drug overdoses, and asphyxiation. This guy had a very weird fixation. Happened in Kansas City, sentenced to 2 life sentences without parole in 1988, and he died in prison on October 8th, 1992. Alright, Robert Berdella, January 31st, 1949, October 8th, 1992, was an American serial killer in Kansas City, Missouri, who raped, tortured, and killed at least 6 men between 1984 and 1987. He was enrolled in the Kansas City Art Institute from 1967 to 1969. During this time, he was convicted but received a suspended sentence for selling amphetamines. He was later arrested for possession of LSD, marijuana, but the charges were dropped for lack of evidence. In 1969, he bought the house at 4315 Charlotte, which is the house that's going to come up in the picture slide right here, which would be the scene of the crimes. He worked as a chef and opened up Bob's Bazaar, which again, pictures of that are going to come up. When was he sentenced? Sentenced to 2 life sentences without parole in 1988. Died in prison October 8th, 1992. So, only a few months before I was born. That stuff always creeps me out. It's right before I was born. I keep picking those. Berdella was apprehended. Alright, are we back? Are we cool? Are we back? Are we fine? Okay, good. Awesome. Great. Sorry about that. Trying to be super professional, and I have no idea what I'm doing, so I'm not gonna lie. I'm 100% an amateur. I'm trying my best. Either way, I'm gonna recap. Robert Berdella, apprehended on April 4th, 1988, after a victim he had tortured for a week, jumped naked from a second story of his house and escaped. By that time, he had abducted and tortured at least 6 other young men. The Kansas City Police Department suspected him in 2 other disappearances. Berdella had detailed torture logs and large number of Polaroid pictures he had taken of his victims, which is one of the ways we know for a fact that the victims are real. There is evidence of the victims, but there are no bodies. So that does play in a lot. Volumes of pictures were recovered by the Kansas City Police Department and remain in their possession. He claimed that he was trying to help some of these victims by giving them antibiotics after torturing them. He had tried to gouge out one of the victims' eyes out, all to see what would happen. He buried one of his victim's skull in his backyard. There are pictures of that. I did not include them. There are... Wait, no. Wait, if the bodies were never found, then how did they... Okay. He buried one of the victim's skull in the backyard and put the dismembered bodies out for the weekly trash picked up. The bodies were never recovered, but left in the landfill. Okay, so they only ever found this one person's skull. Forgive me, they found one person's skull. A few months before the arrest was made, Berdella was offered a ride home from a bar by people who noticed he was too intoxicated to drive. On the way back, Berdella allegedly told stories about young men he'd abducted and tortured in the previous months. It was not taken seriously at that time and considering his advanced state of intoxication. He claimed that the film version of John Fowles' The Collector, in which the protagonist kidnaps and imprisons a young woman, had been his inspiration when he was a teenager. The victims are as numbered. Sorry about that. The victims are as numbered: Jerry Howell, age 20, July 5th, 1984. Robert Shelton, age 18, April 19th, 1984. Mark Wallace, age 20, June 22nd, 1985. James Ferris, age 20, September 26th, 1985. Todd Stoops, age 21, June 17th, 1986. Larry Pearson, age 20, July 19th, 1987. Thank you. I always have this on. I don't take these off. Berdella owned and operated a novelty shop in the Westport Flea Market Bar and Grill area in Kansas City, Missouri. He named his booth Bob's Bazaar and catered to occult-type tastes. The more you read into this, I have some theories about the bazaar and the occult stuff that they have, and where the bodies went to. I think it's a convenient excuse for him to say that he put them out for the trash and then they can never find them in the landfill. I kind of wonder if maybe he just didn't dismember, pull out bones, and then sell them on the black market at his little, bazaar shop. It was the 80s. People are weird. Berdella died of a heart attack in 1992 after writing letters to a minister claiming the prison officials were not giving him his heart medication. His death was never investigated. I guess sometimes you just let some people die. By his own admission, 39-year-old Robert Berdella was a strange character. The owner of Bob's Bazaar in Kansas City, Missouri, Berdella carried business cards that advised that he had poison in his head. Around the house, he showed a milder side, helping his Hyde Park neighbors, Hyde Park is in Hyde Park, Cincinnati, establish a local community crime watch program. His strange behavior on the job was written off as so much advertising hype until the afternoon of April 2nd, 1988. That day, the neighbor of Berdella's stepped outside to find a naked stranger crouching on his porch. The naked 22-year-old wore nothing but a dog collar buckled around his neck, and he blurted out a tale of sexual abuse that sent Berdella's neighbor racing for the telephone to call police. I don't know why I accentuated the two. According to trigger warning for a lot of this, we're talking about a Dahmer style like serial rapist killer. Trigger warning, trigger warning, trigger warning. Super fun. Yeah, I should say that at the beginning. I never think of that shit. Kinky in the wrong ways. That's the stuff that needs to be reported. Where was I? According to the victim, he had been held captive in Berdella's home the past 5 days, subject to repeated sexual assaults before he finally clambered through a second-story window and escaped. Detectives picked Berdella up and searched his home for evidence. In doing so, they opened up a grim Pandora's box of horror. In the house, police discovered some 200 photographs of naked men, the subjects bound and clearly suffering from cruel abuse. Torture devices were also seized in the raid, along with a pair of human skulls, occult literature, and a satanic ritual robe. That weekend, deputies unearthed bone fragments and another human head in Berdella's backyard. On April 4th, 1988, Robert Berdella was arraigned on 7 counts of sodomy, 1 count of felonious restraint, and 1 count of first-degree assault. Bail was initially set at $500,000, revoked the next day when officers testified that the men in Berdella's photographs, tussled up and hanging by his heels, appeared to be dead. While excavation continued on Berdella's property and prosecutors contemplated murder charges, homicide investigators started checking out their list of missing persons dating back all the way to 1984. A bargain guilty plea on 1 count of murder consigned Berdella to prison for life, but authorities suspected him in at least 7 other deaths. On December 19, 1988, Berdella pled guilty to first-degree murder in the death of victim Robert Shelton and 4 counts of second-degree murder involving additional male victims. He was sentenced to a term of life imprisonment, during which he died due to natural causes. Kansas City, Missouri is a typical Midwestern city in the sense that the people are friendly and trustworthy. Neighborhoods are quiet and neighbors enjoy spending time getting to know one another. Easter time, 1988, in the city's west side was no exception until Chris Bryson jumped out the window of a yellow and brown house located at 4315 Charlotte Street that Saturday evening. A house belonging to Robert Andrew Berdella Jr., owner of Bob's Bazaar in Old Westport. Bryson was naked, wearing only a dog collar, when he knocked on the front door of one of Berdella's neighbors seeking refuge from Berdella. For some of Kansas City's police department detectives, there would be no Easter weekend spent with family members. It would prove to be a long, tedious weekend unraveling Kansas City's most heinous serial killer case. The public would soon recognize the name of Bob Berdella without hesitation. The people of Kansas City are not accustomed to media coverage of such torture and murder. Robert Andrew Berdella Jr. grew up in a Midwestern town similar to Kansas City, Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. Again, we start off with Ohio, where Berdella was born in a quiet suburb of Cleveland. Berdella was a quiet, aloof boy who was merely a teenager when his father died suddenly of a heart attack at the age of 39. With a Catholic upbringing, Berdella turned to his church for understanding and sympathy related to the death of his father. The church brought no resolution to his mix of emotions. He would later claim that led to his interest in diverse religion and occult groups, including Satanism. After high school, Berdella, who was his father's namesake, went on to art school. His interest in art is what led to a derailed Berdella to Kansas City in 1967. His taste in art varied, but was always considered a bit strange. He collected oddities and artifacts, which led to him opening the shop up in Westport. Westport is a district in Kansas City known for its nightlife and different type of shops. Retailers specialize in interesting types of curios not found throughout the rest of the city. Berdella's shop was located in the Westport Flea Market, which houses vendors peddling wares in small cubicles, as well as a restaurant known for its unique hamburgers. Oh, that's questionable. Really? Unique hamburgers, my ass. The Westport Flea Market is located on the Westport Road at the intersection of Broadway, the outskirts of the 2-mile strip known as Old Westport. Various comedy and dance clubs are also in the area, which was a hangout for young suburbanites. My case ideas? I watch a lot of true crime in my free time. It's kind of the only thing I watch, the only thing I listen to. That and internet mysteries. So a lot of this is just shit I've been listening to for a while. The captive Chris Bryson. Oh shit, I should have done this. I don't think. Sorry, I just thought of that. I forgot my light. Because I'm a big dumb. Bro. Ah, light. Shit. There we go. Whoops. Anyway. Sorry, ADD as shit. Not really, but yes, kind of, really. Chris Bryson, the young man who jumped out of that window that April morning in 1988. He was in his early 20s. He hustled as a chicken hawk or male prostitute to support his family. Oh, that term is dated. Bryson encountered Berdella late one evening around the old Greyhound bus station in downtown Kansas City. Bryson was attempting to hustle Berdella, but it seemed Berdella was actually hustling Bryson. The two men met some 5 days before the Easter weekend, each with a different idea in mind as to the way the evening would unfold. Berdella was suggesting they go to his house. Young Bryson was pleased with the idea, as he was used to cheap motel rooms and the backseat of cars to eke out his meager living. Oh man, the writing on this is dated. This is uncomfortable to read. Okay, let's... FYI, I'm reading off of Murderpedia, which a lot of this is quite literally just news articles typed out and put up. So some of these are not the nicest, man. The two spent some time at Berdella's house on Charlotte Road getting to know each other. Later that evening, Berdella suggested they go upstairs. There were vicious dogs on the floor they were on, Berdella explained, whereas the room upstairs housed a television and comfortable furniture. Climbing up the stairs, Berdella overtook Bryson with a swift blow to the back of the head with a blunt instrument. Bryson went down quickly, unconscious. Berdella immediately took advantage of the situation and began shooting pictures of his victim with a Polaroid camera. This was a great fascination for Berdella. It would also prove to be too irrefutable evidence of his guilt. Berdella was immaculate in his methodical documentation of the events with each of his victims. Yes, Murderpedia. Think Wikipedia, but for murders, murder, and all of the sorts. Over the next 4 days, Bryson would be subject to many different kinds of tortures at the hands of Berdella. He beat Bryson with an iron club and injected various parts of his body with animal tranquilizers and antibiotics. Berdella shocked Bryson with an electrical current by attaching alligator clamps to different parts of his body, including his beans. Berdella sodomized Bryson, sometimes demanding sex from the incapacitated captive 2 or 3 times a day. During this course of events, Berdella held Bryson captive with bondage and drugs. Bryson was tied with multiple ropes to the iron headboard of the bed, his limbs outstretched. Berdella showed Bryson pictures of men who had been in his position before and would not cooperate. He told Bryson they were now dead and the dogs had eaten them. Wow, Jesus Christ. This was not far from the truth, and Bryson believed every word Berdella said to him. He was fearful of his life, and with good cause. Early on in Bryson's captivity, he screamed as he was R-word, and Berdella injected Drano into his throat. So when I made the Dahmer comment, I believe it was Dahmer who injected Drano into the dude's head. Or... okay, yeah, I'm going to stick with Dahmer. I'm pretty sure that was Dahmer. If it wasn't, I will correct it here on my YouTube, like always. Yay. He told Bryson they were now dead and the dogs had eaten them. This was not far from the truth, and Bryson believed every word Berdella told him. He was fearful for his life and with good cause. Early on in Bryson's captivity, he screamed as he was R-word, and Berdella injected Drano into his throat next to his windpipe, telling him if he continued to call out, he would lose his voice entirely. Berdella jabbed swabs into Bryson's eyes, soaked with a chemical which could have been alcohol. I don't know why they say could have been alcohol. They should. Okay, well, they never found bodies, so how would they be able to test it? Bryson did not think he would ever see his family again, but he continually thought of ways to get out of the situation alive. Berdella would come and go quietly, leaving the drugged and confused Bryson in no idea of where, if at all, Berdella was in the house. On the day of his brave escape, Bryson did not know for sure that Berdella was gone, although in fact Berdella had gone out to run some errands. Bryson had been cooperating with Berdella and therefore was allowed to hold the remote control for the television between his knees with his hands while he was still bound with ropes. He lowered the volume on the television, set to determine Berdella's whereabouts. Also, his hands were tied in a different fashion than usual, and he quickly learned how to loosen the ropes. Another treat Bryson received for his cooperation earlier in the day was a cigarette. Berdella tossed the matches by the bed. The combination of events allowed Bryson to make his quick getaway. After freeing a hand from the ropes, he used the matches to burn the rest of the ropes. His mind was racing with thoughts about what Berdella would do if he was captured while trying to escape. Naked, the ropes dangling, he dashed to the window, worrying that it might be locked or nailed closed. If it was not, he quickly broke the glass. Looking down from the second story, he realized he had no choice but to jump from that height. He injured his foot upon landing, but ignored the pains as he ran into the street to locate the nearest neighbor. The neighbor would not let the naked man onto his home, but he did call the police. Shortly after the police questioned Bryson, he sat at the neighbor's stoop with red swollen eyes and crimson marks on his wrists and ankles. Berdella showed up back home. Berdella was arrested within minutes of Bryson's complaints. As it was obvious by looking at him, Bryson was telling at least a partial truth. The writing in this is just so fucked. The detectives had 20 hours, according to the laws of Missouri, to determine what charges they were holding him on. This would prove to be no easy task. Detectives with the Kansas City Police Department spent the entire weekend cataloging items found in Berdella's home. It became rapidly apparent that he was a collector or pack rat. His house contained things like vertebrae and skulls. It was not easy to determine at a glance if these items were authentic. There were reports of other missing young men, of course, and the goal was to determine if any of them had met with foul play at the hands of Bob Berdella. I mean, if they weren't dead and now they are dead after having met him, but only after having met him, that usually means that they're dead by his hand. How is that hard to understand? Shit. The police spent the remainder of their time that weekend obtaining search warrants and warrants to detain Berdella in custody. However, after sorting through the copious piles of paper, pictures, and other clutter and dog feces in Berdella's home, detectives didn't have time left to do much else. Bryson positively identified Berdella in photos that detectives showed him while he was in the hospital. Berdella was originally charged with forced sodomy and charges relating to the torture Bryson endured. Berdella spent his life involved with young males in one way or another. He volunteered for youth organizations, Neighborhood Crime Watch, and various other committees. He let young men live with him and employed them to work in his store. Oh, isn't that just lovely? He was involved with the Neighborhood Crime Watch and used that to snatch young men, said one of Berdella's neighbors who preferred to remain anonymous. Why would you prefer to remain anonymous if you knew this stuff? Oh yeah, that's why, because you knew this stuff. After locating questionable items in Berdella's home, such as skulls and other bones, the police noticed an area in the basement's dirt floor that by its dimensions resembled a grave. Police interviewed neighbors, which led police to search the property around the house that was located in the backyard were other freshly dug places. A worst-case scenario seemed to be unfolding. On Easter weekend, it would prove to be too difficult to locate someone who could operate and had any access to earth-moving equipment. I mean, okay, yeah, it's Easter weekend. No construction worker is going to be like, yeah, I'll help you unearth bodies. It's Jesus. Let me guess, none of these bodies are going to come back to life. I mean, I might not either. That sounds like a recipe for, like, Evil Dead to start. Or maybe I'm just paranoid. I don't know. As Berdella was currently being held by warrants previously issued stemming from Bryson's comments, time was on the side of Kansas City Police Department. However, as it was always the case, the media was alerted to the strange turn of events. The media soon began to swarm the house on Charlotte Street, complicating the entire investigation. Excavation of the backyard began as hordes of reporters were on site. Almost immediately, the detectives spotted a human skull with hair and soft tissue still intact. The work continued in the backyard into Monday. Strange items were found, but unrelated to any human death. Bones from the animals, jars with bird feathers, etc. The discovery lent credence to the idea that perhaps Berdella was into Satanism or some form of occult religion. Okay, now, to be honest, the Satanic Panic was also happening at this time, so, I mean, who knows how much was added there just by the media and shit like that. It seemed that every new discovery created more questions for detectives rather than answers. In the meantime, detectives also continued to work inside the house, impeded by the amount of clutter and piles of dog feces. I love the piles of dog feces bit. Luminol, a spray chemical used by the detectives to highlight blood, was applied to many areas in the basement with positive results. People began contacting the police department with concern for loved ones that were missing and known to have spent time with Berdella. Witnesses stepped forward to discuss their encounters with Berdella. Some claimed to have seen Berdella injecting people with drugs, primarily the tranquilizers he used for his dogs. There is so much more to this story that's not being talked about, but because it's old, it's not like we can ask anyone. I hate that. Others claim to be victims of these assaults. How many of them were... I imagine most of them were true, more than not. The intangible evidence was overwhelming, leading detectives to realize a death, if not more than one, had occurred in Berdella's property, but there was no body. It was most difficult to convince a judge to seriously consider murder charges when there was no corpse to prove a murder occurred. The skull and vertebrae located early in the excavation of the yard was sent to the lab for positive identification. As Berdella had so many old, odd artifacts in his store and house, it was difficult to determine what was authentic and what was not. The detectives continued the tedious, methodical search, pending results from the lab regarding the bones. They devised a backyard grid, allowing them to search the area and most effectively without going over ground that had been previously searched. Copious documentation provided by Berdella led detectives to begin contacting the people whose names were listed in the diaries he kept of the torture administered to each victim. However, identifying the faces contained within the photographs proved to be difficult in some cases. Some pictures were of Berdella pseudonymizing his victims, where no face was visible, not even Berdella's. Police began deciphering the code of shorthand Berdella utilized while logging the events taking place with his victims. It was written in a rather elementary and crude style. For example, police were able to rapidly determine BF represented anal penetration with his pee-pee, while Thing F stood for using his finger. Oh, good God. Okay, yeah, I get it. Butt fucked and finger fucked. Cute. Very cute. There were dozens of references to F in various fashions, such as carrot F or cucumber F. Oh, God, bro. Which meant Berdella inserted cucumbers or carrots. I'm not going to explain the rest. The logs contained other equally disturbing information regarding the frequency and dosage of medication administered to the victims and where he injected them. Some names were listed frequently, so the detectives began the search for those individuals. They were quickly determined that the information contained in the logs directly corresponded to dates and times of young men who were missing. The people of Kansas City began to realize that this would be a huge case. They had a serial killer on their hands. That was lovely. Thank you. Your logs had to be that detailed. Thank you. It's an orange juice kind of night. You need your vitamins if you're going to deal with this kind of bullshit. Bob Berdella sat in the Jackson County Jail awaiting his fate. For his own safety, he was isolated in a private area of the sick bay. Sexual abusers, particularly homosexuals, are often the victim of violence at the hands of other prisoners, which is true and sad. Observers claim Berdella appeared remorseful and in denial, perhaps somewhat pensive and reflective. He refused to speak to anyone who might convey his side of the story, such as the media or police. His friends who visited him said that he wished to speak to a particular minister with whom he had developed a friendship, not necessarily for religious counseling, but to have someone to confide in. Well, wouldn't that be religious counseling? Berdella was not interested at the time in confessing anything to anyone. He ignored the entire situation. As an individual accustomed to being in control, the experience was humiliating and irritating. Because of his contacts in his business and years spent in Kansas City, Berdella had a lot of acquaintances, some of which were friends, but to all who knew him, it was difficult to believe such a monster lived within him. Some friends accused the police of framing Berdella. Actually, no one in Kansas City wanted to believe a human being was capable of this behavior, whether it was Berdella or not, and it shattered the entire image of a wholesome Midwestern town. This reaction from people made the investigation even more confusing. The people had no corpse and therefore could not prove a murder happened. Friends and family claim Berdella was an eccentric, yet very likable and responsible. His worst fault, from the viewpoint of his friends, was that Berdella was condescending when dealing with women or people he considered less than knowledgeable than himself. Oh, well, thank you, Berdella. Okay, yeah. Women aren't knowledgeable. You're the one who got caught. Never mind. Not going to touch that. A week into the investigation, the detectives knew they had to identify people in the pictures, including the ones with no faces portrayed. It is suggested by an outside source that the detectives asked Berdella to assume the pose of the person taking the photographs, whose stomach, lower limbs, and occasional arms or hands were photographed. Oh yeah, recreate your pictures for us, bro. None of us have a kink, I promise, bro. It's cool, bro. Just recreate the pictures, bro. The plan was put in action to have Berdella take strikingly similar photographs to himself in these poses. They would be sent to a professional for positive identification. At the time, sample of Berdella's body hair would also be obtained. Berdella was very embarrassed and humiliated by having to pose for the photographs, yet cooperative for the most part. He did resist with more than one position he was asked to assume, one of which was positioning him to represent having anal sex with another, when the detectives wanted to position his hand as if he was shoving something inside someone's anus. That's lovely. So good fisting angle. At Berdella's arraignment in the courtroom of Judge Avon Randall, Berdella shocked everyone by entering a plea of guilty to the charge of murder in the first degree. Eventually, Berdella confessed to the murder and torture of 6 young men between the years of 1984 and 1987. With an uncanny ability to recall detail, he told his frightening story as court reporter Ruth Emma Petro recorded his grisly event of the carnage in the court record. He enjoyed this moment in the limelight while in the courtroom, confessing because he was in total control of the stage. Do the flower. Oh, come on, man. This dude had to go through a lot. A lot of these people had to go through a lot. They're victims. It'll be funnier when he gets the flower. Don't worry. This confession was the only way detectives had a real case, since the bodies of his victims were never located. Berdella claimed to have dismembered each body with various instruments, such as a chainsaw and knives. Berdella recounted how he placed the bodies in the bathtub and made precise incisions at the elbow joints, legs, and groin to allow the blood to drain from the dead victim. He then packaged them into plastic trash bags and dragged them to the curb for the trashmen to pick up and take to the dump. Berdella told the courtroom full of people, including loved ones of the victims, how he watched the bags being taken from the curb to ensure they were not disturbed. I don't think that works. I think that's a load of bullshit. By confessing to the city's prosecutor, Albert Reiterer, Berdella was able to negotiate for his life. He was promised the death penalty would not be sought if he provided the grisly details of his actions, and he did. Judge Vincent E. Baker subsequently found Bob Berdella guilty of 6 counts of murder and sentenced him to 2 life sentences without parole. It was highly recommended that Berdella go for psychiatric evaluation, which placed him outside the general prison population and prevented any violence from other inmates. The real Bob Berdella began to emerge in the ensuing psychiatric records. Berdella appreciated control and considered himself important. He wanted his victims to be his sex slaves. He claimed never to have killed them intentionally. It is theorized that murderers convince themselves the victim is less of a human being. This perception gives the killer an opportunity to justify his actions, or at very least, feel less guilty about it. Berdella referred to his victims as play toys. In Berdella's case, the victims were young men with little or no education. Most of the victims made a living selling themselves and living on drugs. Obviously, they were beneath the social stature of a well-liked and successful businessman such as Berdella. It was this mentality that led Berdella to the grotesque acts of torture to which his victims were subjected. He would befriend them and then deprive them of all emotions and sensation unless administered by him. Berdella beat his victims with various instruments and injected them with drugs or chemicals. He put chemicals into their body cavities. It had been said that he had put window caulk into the ears of one of his victims. He sodomized them in a variety of ways with his pnai and vegetables or his arm. Wow, there's actually a long list of things I'm not going to read. I shouldn't have read those first ones. One of the victims died from a ruptured anal wall after Berdella put his arm deep inside of the man. Oh my god, that's horrible. Jesus. In his confession, Berdella callously referred to it as Fist F. Some victims died from asphyxiation, while others died from drug overdoses. Berdella believed he was a good and upstanding individual who may have done some horrible things. He set forth to prove the theory to the public. He hated having his name smeared in the public eye. Bro, you're a fucking gay serial killer in like one of the worst ways. Your name is besmirched. In an attempt to get back in the good graces of the public, Berdella opened a trust fund for his victim's family, administered by Reverend Roger Coleman, who had stood by him throughout the entire ordeal. Some families of the victims sued Berdella for wrongful deaths, but failed because of the inability to meet the statute of limitations for such crimes. Wow. Berdella was smug in his remarks concerning the impending lawsuits. Berdella claimed that he did not understand why he was a serial killer or what in his life had contributed to his behavior. He took great offense and claimed people incompetent for thinking he himself understood it. The song's right. Wreck yourself, fool. Hi, Dahmer. Thank you so much for being here. Considering your namesake. I'm gonna reread that statement, just because what the fuck. Berdella claimed that he did not understand why he was a serial killer or what in his life had contributed to his behavior. He took great offense and claimed people incompetent for thinking he himself understood it. So we're incompetent assholes for thinking for any reason he might understand why the fuck he does what he does. I mean, like, I eat too much. I eat my feelings away. I know why I eat my feelings away, because feelings hurt, but food doesn't. Like, it's really simple, bud. But to call the people incompetent, nah, motherfucker, you were the incompetent one, but in, like, the worst way. Putting Drano in a motherfucker's windpipes. He rejected emphatically the claim that he had any dealings with Satanism, which I could understand. Like I said, the Satanic Panic was really, really heavy at the time. This was the late 80s, early 90s was the absolute height of the Satanic Panic, and I should probably do a video all on that, but if I'm going to do that, I'm going to do a lot of research and put a lot of fucking effort into it and do like a really long stream. Or even like a multi-day stream for the Satanic Panic, because it's worth it. Berdella served only 4 years of his time in the state penitentiary in Jefferson City, Missouri, before he died of a heart attack at the age of 43 on October 8th, 1992, just a few months before I was born. Prior to his death, Dell Dunmeyer, a millionaire originally from Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, then living in the suburbs of Kansas City, purchased all of Berdella's belongings, including the house on Charlotte Street, repeatedly coming up in the pictures, and the inventory of his home and store. Dunmeyer claimed to have no interest in the items other than he felt he understood Berdella. He later leveled the house and sold the property to the surrounding neighbors. Who the hell is this guy? And then that's like the literal end of the entire Murderpedia. Ends with this creepy motherfucker, Dell Dunmeyer. Who the fuck is Dell Dunmeyer, and why do you feel like you understood him? Okay, well, Dell Dunmeyer just recently died in 1986. No, the Kansas Star, I'm not paying you to read your goddamn article. You can suck a fat nutsack. I will never pay you to read your newspaper. You suck anyway. Dos Equus guy? What does that have to do with the... Wait. Oh, wow. Okay. Okay, 2016 is fairly recent compared to the 1992 that this guy died in, okay? That's fairly recent. Also, okay, so let me switch this over. Work. Stop the slideshow. Okay, so if anyone knows the Dos Equus guy, this guy, the most interesting man in the world, that's the guy who bought all of this dude's shit in his house. Like, that's fucking crazy. Robert Berdella, the curio merchant, art collector, and confessed murderer, needed cash. Whoops. Move further out of the way. Here we go. Last summer, he pleaded guilty to the slaying of Larry Pearson, a 20-year-old boarder he had taken in. Berdella, 40, was sentenced to life in prison, and he still faces charges in a second murder of another young man whose skull police allegedly found inside Berdella's buff-colored house? What the fuck is buff-colored? Who's buff-colored? Is this buff-colored? Like, what? Like, hunk man colored? Is that a thing? Buff Pro, the gamer? I don't know what buff means. Buff colored house on Charlotte Street here. Naturally, Berdella's legal expenses were mounting every day, even as he languished in the Jackson County, Missouri jail. For the last several weeks, he was sued, engineered, manipulated, cajoled, and hired people to help him stage a series of auctions offering his mind-boggling accumulation of about 2,000 rare antiques, ordinary household ghouls, and an uncountable assortment of egregious junk. Egregious, I can't read. This was the latest collection of its kind. This is the largest collection of its kind I've ever seen, said R. Bond Blackman, the arts and antiques appraiser who compiled the catalog in time for a 2-weekend series of auctions last month. First, the rare pieces and the furniture would be auctioned. A week later, Berdella's vast stores of costume jewelry, household items, and inventory from the store he used to own would be auctioned. For years, Berdella had been known around the city's bohemian enclaves as a community-spirited, somewhat artistic purveyor of artifacts. His little shop with skulls in the window, Bob's Bazaar Bazaar, anchored an informal indoor shopping mall saloon swap meet called the Old Westport Flea Market. In his nearby neighborhood, Hyde Park, Berdella led a campaign to rid the area of a street crime. As a former chef at private clubs, he invariably brought the best covered dishes to the block parties. Neighbors, however... Oh, hello, Mike. I just smacked the shit out of you. I'm sorry. Neighbors, however, had virtually no idea how Berdella spent his private moments. Then, on April 2nd, Christopher Bryson, 22, leapt from a second-story window in the Berdella residence. Bryson, who wore only a dog collar at the time of his escape, told police Berdella had knocked him out, tied him up, and then tortured and really abused him for 3 days. The subsequent investigation turned up not only the skulls of 2 men who allegedly had been murdered, but photographs. It's a light brownish yellow. The color buff is a light brownish yellow. Okay, that's weird. Who even knows that, who knows that? Like, I imagine you had to look it up, but like, what the fuck's a buff color? Like, in concept, what's a buff color? Years of young men in a bleak section of downtown known as the meat rack. Oh god. And forcing them to endure bizarre and painful acts far beyond their expectations or even their most vivid nightmares. In piecing together this information, police encountered a remarkable cache of worldly goods in the Berdella abode. Rooms had been stacked from floor to ceiling with boxes and bags filled with jewelry, African masks, Roman glassware, New Guinea wood carvings, pottery, candlesticks, coins, beads, and other treasures. Prosecutors seized the trove under a state law called the Criminal Activities Forfeiture Act. That's interesting. Hi, Ivy. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, this gets a little bit sketchy the more you hear about it. I'll be honest. There's no bodies. There's a lot of pictures, but that could always be planted, especially if, you know, he's not super identifiable, like just his lower body and stuff. They seize all of his shit. Okay. I create conspiracies in my head, don't worry. I know he's guilty. Prosecutors seized the trove under a state law called the Criminal Activity Forfeiture Act. Charlie Pender, Berdella's lawyer, persuaded a judge to release Berdella's formidable collection, arguing it had been seized before any wrongdoing had been proven or confessed, and that the goods were not connected with the commission of a crime. Oh, you moved? Well, I hope out of hurricane path, bro. But I hope it went well. Moving is, like, really stressful, I know that. Shortly after getting his stuff back, Berdella decided to sell his collection and appointed Pender to make the arrangements. Pender hired estate auctioneer Gary Reither of the suburban Excelsior Springs, and Reither hired appraiser R. Bond Blackman Berdella. Berdella, meanwhile, conducted operations from jail, where apparently he had virtually unlimited access to a telephone. Can I fucking, like... No, it'll keep that ad there. That sucks. Well, I try to make the ad smaller. Whatever. Reither, Blackman, and their crews removed the accumulated goods from police storage. 1,000 boxes of little items, plus a truckload of furniture and a semi-trailer filled with mundane articles that they had no time to unload. They took the mountain of things to the hastily rented auction site, a green 5,000 square foot house to the west bottom section of town. Reither kept the place secret for more than a month, fearing crowds of curiosity seekers. West Bottom. Oh wow, North Carolina? North Carolina's awesome. Job applications is no fun, I know that much. West Bottom's an area made up of loading docks stitched together by railroad tracks and perfumed by stockyards. Can be reached by car, but even most native citizens would need a road map and clear directions to find the Berdella collection. The most prominent landmark was a large electric sign attached to an old warehouse that an entrepreneur had tricked up as a haunted house for the Halloween season. The sign said Edge of Hell. And this is real sketchy. And then a millionaire bought all of his shit? What the fuck is this going on? Auctioneer Reither announced the auction site quietly in a brochure discreetly advertised in publications read by serious collectors and dealers. What the fuck? Okay, this is getting sketchier and sketchier the more I read about it. Blackman was certainly those people who would be impressed. Berdella had been collecting since the mid-60s, and the appraiser came upon Syro-Roman glass, ancient beads, Tibetan bronzes, Greco-Roman poetry, pottery, Indonesian puppets, African tribal costumes. Jesus Christ. We had 57 pieces of Roman glass alone, some of it as thin as paper. Blackman marveled. You look at it and immediately feel a kinship of craftsmanship who worked 2,000 years ago. The police must have exercised great care when they packed those boxes. A good many professionals and serious amateurs wanted to take a look. Blackman reported, "We had calls from all over the United States, from as far away as Hawaii. We had to make the seats reservation only. I understand that some of those people are willing to pay up to $500 and $1,000 for one rare bead." God damn. When the doors opened on the first morning of the auction, the people who trooped in appeared to be more shrewd than that. They moved slowly past tables laden with coins, jars, Roman tear vials, originally filled with tears and buried with the dead, and all the flotsam, jetsam, and treasure of a dozen cultures. Some made notes in their catalogs or consulted antique reference books. Others merely nodded sagely. Few of them realized that the dramatic lit and art-laden arrangement of tables that had been approved by Berdella himself, he had orchestrated the whole thing with the aid of videotapes taken by Rathier's assistants. This dude had like millions of dollars in artifacts. And the cops just took that shit and like ran away with it damn near. Okay. Rathier's 20-odd helpers, most of them relatives, and all of them dressed in black shirt or trousers, white blouses or shirts, and bright red ties, kept a wary eye on browsers who had wandered in. Within minutes of opening, assistant auctioneer Wally Sims had spotted the familiar face of a professional estate sale shoplifter, and he was swiftly escorted towards the door. Charlene Yeeman, another assistant, marveled at the quality of the largest and pondered its source. It makes you wonder what kind of person this might have been who collected it. I guess he's someone very intelligent, but with a quirk in his personality. Yeah, okay, being a gay serial killer is like a quirk in the personality, let's say that much. The auction seems to share Yeeman's rather casual assessment of the situation. They filled about 200 folding chairs and murmured mostly about the arcane details in their collection and merchandising interest. Monique Schofield, a Kansas City-based collector of Egyptian and Roman antiques, seemed not at all squeamish as she peered through some locked glass cabinets containing jewelry from the Nile. What I find so difficult in understanding is that when you're in Egypt, you can't find any of this stuff to buy, she complained, and yet they have a very good collection here. Well, that's because they moved all that shit out of Egypt. I mean, Hobby Lobby's half responsible for that. Faye, her husband, smiled. The collectors have already got all of it, he said. They took it out of Egypt a long time ago. No shit, it was called the late 1800s. Soon Rathier began his yammering, incessant auctioneer chant, a combination of conman's silkiness. Okay, we're getting so much into, like, I don't need a full fucking walkthrough of this. $1,000 and $500 bills stayed up deep in the bidders' pockets as they picked off the most rarest of the antiques for $200 or less. "You're really stealing some of this stuff," Blackman groused at one point. "This next piece is so important I'm going to start it at $100 myself." Bidding soon exceeded Blackman's $100 bill, but not by much. Blackman and Rathier glared down from the podium, their black tuxedo jackets adding authority to their white shirts and blah blah blah. Fetch it, Christine. When the Roman Syrian vase, a light green with traces of iridescence, arrived on the block, Blackman noted, "You will not see this again in your life in an auction or in Kansas City." After the bidding of the vase stopped at $550, he lamented, "There goes $2,000 worth of glass." But Rathier's face began to sweat as he sprayed his machine gun voice through a few more items. "Everyone's seen the jacket, haven't they? Now I'm going to take it off." Most of the onlookers, active bidders, stood even less formally than Rathier did. They wore denim jackets, ski clothes, $500 sweaters, or $3 t-shirts. Okay, why are we talking about the quality of their clothes? I want to get to the point where, like, rich millionaire dude bought all the shit. Okay, by mid-morning, everyone realized that one man seemed bent on acquiring almost everything still unsold. Of course, local flamboyant millionaire industrialist Dell Dunmeyer stood near the back with his 9-month-old son in his arms and, nodding towards the podium from time to time, topped every bid. A few outsiders seemed puzzled by the intrusion, but the Kansas City residents knew what was happening, and they all knew his story. Dunmeyer, clad that day in a brown leather vest, brown plaid shirt and scruffy jeans, once robbed a bank in Abilene? Okay, Del Dunmire robbed a bank in Abilene. After his release from the Kansas City Penitentiary in 1960, Dunmire worked as a machinist and with considerable help from kindly citizens, eventually put together Growth Industries Enterprises, a supplier of aftermarket replacement parts for the aviation industry. Oh, well, shit. Well, that's how you make yourself a fucking millionaire. Dunmire had walked into the warehouse with a little entourage consisting of high school chum Bob Shermer and his wife and son Josh and Dunmire's ex-wife Debbie. The contingency immediately recognized that the auction of Robert Berdella collection had become a huge public event. Dunmire's presence confirmed it. Dunmire keeps a profile about as low as a big red zit, one local businessman remarked. The billionaire drives around town in a crimson Rolls and throws major money at every charity. Last year, he took his entire Penawaty, Pennsylvania high school class on a Caribbean cruise for a 35th anniversary reunion. For his wedding, he rented an entire downtown hotel and invited all of Kansas City to the reception. 4,000 showed up. God damn, man. Why didn't I get that invite? Shit, I'd have gone. The beds too, noting his... Oh, yeah, the beds too. Nodding his head or slightly raising his hand, the bearded Dunmire worked his way rapidly through Berdella's household goods, stained glass, oriental rugs, a rare print, tables, chairs, desks, lamps, and, during a hushed moment, providing the capper with several moments of the news media had been waiting for, Dunmire bought Berdella's 2 large beds as well. You mean the one that he, like, had people chained to? That's, like, really kind of sick. Those should be going to some kind of museum of macabre down in southern Florida, cracked a speculator. Dunmire told a bystander that a public relations consultant had advised him to skip the beds. But what can the media do to me that they haven't already done, Dunmire reasoned. He had just dropped perhaps $15,000 in the course of an hour or two. If the items were the steals that the auctioneer had appraised them claimed to be, he could turn around and sell his antiques at a huge profit, which is very true. Dunmire figured when he probably would hand over the proceeds to charity, okay? He was thinking maybe I could give this stuff a better definition. Well, alright, okay. I respect that. He said, I teach kids from experience not to rob banks. Yeah, okay, because that didn't get you anywhere. You can make more money with a pen. Everyone has defined these things as bad. Dunmire continued, gesturing around the assembled Berdella collection. But I think good can come out of anything. There's an old saying that the evil known is not the good they do. All right, okay. So the rest of that is like pointless. Anyway, so let me put that down. Anyway, that'll probably be all for tonight. That's the entire story. I thought it would go on a little bit longer. It took me a little bit longer to read it when I was doing it by myself earlier. I'm still trying to get everything set up. I'm still trying to get my setup set up. It's not so easy to do in here, but hey, I'm doing it. I'm still here. I'm trying my best. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you so much for being with me. I would game, but we got to run the generator, so yay. First and foremost, make sure to check out my Onlyfans. I am running a deal from here on. I am lowering my price by a little bit. Definitely make sure to check out my Fansly. I'm posting twice all week and hopefully twice from here on out, period. Definitely make sure to check out my Etsy. Make sure to check out all my social medias. Go follow my YouTube. Seriously. I'm going to start reducing the number of days that I stream on Twitch, and I'm going to start trying to produce more tangible, effortful videos. Like, I want to do the true crimes, but I want to be able to put the time into actually researching all this stuff beforehand and putting together like a cohesive like presentation for you guys. I also want to get into doing some other things, so I'm not only gaming, and I want to use my Twitch pretty much for gaming only when I actually want to do it. So yeah, make sure to go check out all my links and make sure to have a great night. Loser. Oh, and stick around for the raid.